Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
It's my Judaism that still is going to be a source of who I am. I'm not going to give that up because other people are trying to take it from me.
Now, imagine this. There is a community in transition. They're going through the wilderness. They've escaped some major hardship. And they're looking for purpose. They're looking for structure. They're looking for guidance. At the same sort of time, their leader, Moses, ascends Mount Sinai. And for 40 days and 40 nights, he's there receiving profound wisdom and knowledge. And he comes down with the Torah. And this book is later going to shape the destiny of a lot of people. This is the book of the Jews, of the Jewish people. It's called the Torah. And the journey doesn't really end here. The Torah, like we've known with a lot of scriptures, has been through a lot of hardship. And even though it was given so long ago, it's still relevant today. And that's why we're having this conversation today. I'm your host, Anshu Bahanda, and this is part of the series, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Living. The season is called Sacred Texts, Timeless Wisdom, and we have with us today Rabbi Miriam Berger. She's a leader, she's a teacher, she's worked very hard through her life for making Jewish wisdom meaningful in today's world. So we're very lucky to be having this conversation. Welcome to the chat, Rabbi Miriam.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
I want to ask you to explain to us the essence of the Torah, because I know it involves the commandments, and a lot of people know that, but it's more than just that, right? So please explain that to us.
Absolutely. It is definitely more than rules. And I think unlike some revealed text, I think it's also not trying to suggest that there is just one truth or that everybody has to be Jewish. But rather it's kind of giving a blueprint on how to create a fair and just society. So yes, it kind of tells the story of how the Jewish people came to be, but it does so with a lesson that is, if you know that you came from slavery to freedom, that you were strangers in the land, then it gives you the blueprint to understand how you should therefore treat the stranger who comes into your land. You know, it gives us details of how to collect our harvest. But it isn't giving us those rules just in a way of being able to say, this is agricultural law, but rather in a way of saying, how can the rules that we do something as basic as collecting in the harvest be there to support those less fortunate than you are, the vulnerable in society? So each of these rules, on each of these sets of rules, comes with that sense of this is how we build for a better society. You know, whether it's the dietary laws or the creation story that are more familiar to people, they're there with a sense of how do you have a lightness of touch? How do you see your role as the steward in the world, and try not to cause damage to the natural world around you? So I would say Torah is less about kind of faith, less about belief, less in kind of accepting the sort of accuracy of this is a history or a science book, but rather about inviting you to be part of being a kind of role model, a light unto the nations, and saying this is how we create justice in the world.
Thank you. So yes, we heard a lot. I mean, in my research, there was a lot about justice. But the thing I want to ask you before that is, when I was in Israel, I went to the Holocaust Museum, the Yad Vashem. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, Yad Vashem. Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of talk there about how people had worked to preserve the Torah. So there's this story about the resilience of the Jewish people and how hard they worked to preserve the Torah. And I think it's associated with the Yanovska concentration camp, where some people managed to sneak in scrolls of the Torah, and then they sewed it together, and it gave them hope. It gave them a sense of being able to carry on in spite of all the hardships that they were going through, which were unimaginable. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting that you heard the story about the kind of the story of the physicality of the Torah, because actually there are lots of stories about Jews in concentration camps during the Second World War trying to preserve their Jewish identity. For me, the really special one is told by Rabbi Hugo Grin, who was himself a child with his dad in a concentration camp called Lieberossa. And, he was one of these wonderful kind of great inspirational teachers of my childhood. And therefore, the image of him as the child in that moment. And he talks about his father beckoning him and some other inmates into the corner of their barracks. And he had melted a margarine ration. Now, these people were starving in the camps. There was no surplus of food. And he had clearly saved over time these little bits of margarine ration, which he was then melting to light. And, Hugo tells the story of trying to stop his father from wasting this precious food. And his father explains that it was the first night of Hanukkah. And that what he was doing what they could do to light the candles for Hanukkah, to keep this festival and to keep the practices. And the way he explained it to his son, which is the way that Rabbi Hugo Grin then kind of repeated his father's words that were so powerful, was, we've learned that we can live for 3 weeks without food. We know that when we need to, we can live for up to 3 days without water, but we also know we can't live for more than 3 minutes without hope. And that sense of how do you preserve who you are? For those Jews in the concentration camp, there was a sense that they knew they were only there because they were Jewish. And, it didn't matter if they were the most secular or most observant Jews. Once they were in that concentration camp, they were only there because of their Judaism. And there's clearly something about what does it mean to be able to say, it's my Judaism that still is going to be a source of who I am. I'm not going to give that up because other people are trying to take it from me. There was just recently story shared from one of the hostages that has been just recently released from Gaza. And her name's Rabbi Berger. And I understand that she came also from a pretty secular family in Israel. And when she was in one of the hostages, she kind of showed that resilience, that defiance by, however scarce the food was, she refused to eat non-kosher meat. And she refused to perform certain tasks on Shabbat because they would have been breaking the laws of Shabbat in the midst of such horror. And the only thing that I can do to preserve a sense of identity, a sense of humanity, a sense of being myself is to kind of hold on to these basic tenets of Judaism. So, these stories that are now kind of 80 years old from the Holocaust are now being seen through the eyes of what it meant, in today's society, to have one's Jewish identity being a cause for horror and a cause for despicable acts, but also using one's Jewish practice to kind of hang on to, maintain one's identity and maintain one's, preserve that sense of being part of something bigger and trying to make sense of the world.
You were talking about one of the hostages who came back recently. One of my very close friends, her very close friend's daughter was also one of the hostages that came back. I don't know the name, but I remember her sending us images and we were all crying watching that. That was incredible, so powerful. I want to ask you about the 3 values that kept coming back to me, which seemed to be at the heart of the Torah: justice, compassion, and humility. I kept getting those. from different places. So when we're living in this fast-paced world, when we're living in a space where people are constantly on their phones, it's this digital age, your brain is all over the place. People are so busy, they have all these responsibilities, anxiety, stress is going up like crazy. How do these three things that you live by give people a sense of purpose in their lives?
So I think Jewish practice, whether it's scriptures or the values behind Jewish practice, enable us to keep going back to that kind of question of kind of why do we do what we do, right? Sometimes you're so much on that kind of hamster wheel of life. Sometimes you're so much in it and so much doing it that actually that question of who am I and why am I doing this is often sort of forgotten. And we often don't take that moment to sit back and question and ask, even if we're on the right wheel or on the right path, and that we're working towards goals that actually mean something and are important to us. It feels like there's this grand desire to accumulate wealth, or to gain this kind of sense of what does it mean to feel successful. But in reality, like, what are those things? What does it mean to accumulate great wealth? What does it mean to feel successful? I think we're encouraged to ask, well, what's the ultimate goal? And I kind of see that in two ways. I think there's the piece that is this vision of what we call Haolam Haba, the world to come, like in other religions, of where we go to, or what that place beyond life is. But rather that what it does is paint this life as a kind of waiting room. And therefore it sort of diminishes, or it puts into perspective kind of what all of this is about. It's about that kind of waiting room experience. And yet, I think we're also asked that other kind of deeply poignant question, which is, when I leave this world, will I be leaving it better for my having been here? What impact have I made? What difference have I made? And is it about what I've done? Because we're not all going to find the cure for cancer. Or is it about how I've kind of made people feel? And I think that sense of being able to hold those things kind of together really do give that kind of impetus to justice and compassion and humility. And we kind of see ourselves within those two worlds of the waiting room and the, I need to have made a difference here. And I think each festival or each moment aids that. So Shabbat, the Sabbath, comes round every week and really is the ultimate kind of time to stop and reflect. It was the digital detox before we had anything digital, because you were forced into that kind of stopping creating, stopping doing, and being able to say, I need to recharge sometimes. I can't always be making it happen. Or on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, we're given this annual moment to say, am I the person I want to be? Am I behaving in a way that's making me proud? Or could I be doing better? And how do I draw a line in the sand from this year and make next year, something different? Or the festival of Sukkot, where, we might be seen to be quite nuts, building these kind of booths outside our house, these fragile kind of shacks in the garden. But they help us to acknowledge the fragility of life and how fragile other people's lives are and what our role is in that. So I think that, the values behind Jewish practice are constantly pushing that agenda of looking out into the world and also reflecting in our own selves and asking those questions of kind of justice and compassion and humility.
I want to also ask you now about these traditions. So you mentioned Sabbath, and then you mentioned dietary laws. There's also prayers. So even though these traditions have been carried on for centuries, there is this deeper significance, like you said, to these rituals. How do people connect this and these practices to their purpose, to their community, to themselves and to their spirituality?
So I think the easy answer is community. That it's very easy to see yourself as an individual, and unless you're kind of put within a bigger context of community, it often kind of leads to being very self-obsessed and selfish, and behaviors that we wouldn't be kind of seeking to encourage in society. But whether it's the dietary laws, meaning that you might want to live within community in order to access kosher food, or whether it's our prayer life, which determines you need to pray within a minyan, within 10 people at least, there's a sense of being part of other people's lives. So if you're praying, in a community of at least 10 people, then there's not much point praying to win the lottery, for instance, or for your football team to win, because actually that might be totally at odds with what else is going on around you, and that you pray for the things that are going to benefit community as a whole, not you as an individual. So I think kind of setting oneself up, understanding oneself to be kind of one small part in something bigger, is definitely part of that wellness kind of initiative, that idea. I don't think I can say the words practicing gratitude without there being a slight kind of Americanism. We've got to practice gratitude. It kind of feels like this modern kind of wellness centered concept, but actually, it's deeply rooted within a religious life. What does it mean to have said a blessing before you eat anything, or to say grace after you've finished every meal? It immediately puts you in a different frame than if you're grabbing a sandwich at your desk whilst also kind of being in a meeting and trying to answer emails. There's something about taking that moment to acknowledge how lucky you are, just to be able to do that, very menial task of satiating yourself at a mealtime. So I think that gratitude piece, I think it all puts stuff in perspective. And I think perspective is a huge element of what it means to live a content life, is to see your own challenges and your own life within the perspective of both time and other people's experiences. So I think all of these issues kind of give us that sense of being connected to something bigger, something outside of yourself, whether that's kind of over the cosmos or if that's the people around you, and being able to anchor all of our day-to-day concerns within that framework.
You know what you say about community, so it was so interesting. But tell me, how do these rituals also help you get connected to yourself, to get to know yourself well?
They give you time. So they enable you to stop. And also they enable you to punctuate that time. So for me, there's something about, as a mum of a 13-year-old, I'm forever being forced to kind of look back and say, where did the time go? How is it possible that this, little baby who keeps showing up on my phone as memories from the last however many years as photographs is this teenager now? And I think that what religion and religious practice gives you is that way of being able to punctuate time, both the good and the wonderful moments and the devastating and difficult moments. So, it was just earlier on sort of last year that we celebrated my son becoming bar mitzvah. He reached that age within kind of a Jewish legal sense of maturity. But what is it to take a hormonal teenager, teach them tools that they didn't know that they could ever acquire, practices they thought were beyond them, and absolutely send them into those teenage years when they're full of angst and they're full of questioning and they're full of that desire to rebel, with a sense of pride and a sense of being absolutely immersed in love, both in a loving family and a loving community. What does it mean to take somebody who's been recently bereaved and be with them during that first week that we call Shiva, where they're not obligated to do anything, not even cook for themselves, but people will be in their homes and kind of tending to their needs, to realize that actually the first week is different to the first month, that's different to the first year. There's a psychological journey to our religious practices that mark time in the most beautiful and significant way. And I think stop that very modern phenomena of going, where does time go? It's just vanished. Because it punctuates it in a way that allows you to see that passage of time and respond to it. There's a beautiful analogy used that is an artist wielding a paintbrush needs to step back from the canvas to truly be able to see the artwork. And for me, Shabbat is a great opportunity to step back from life's canvas and say, aha, I remember what I was trying to do as the big picture, but I got totally fixated on this detail, and now I need to keep going.
So explain the dietary laws to me as well, because I've heard various things from various people.
What's interesting with the dietary laws in Torah is that they don't come with an explanation. So they don't say, here are the dietary laws, keep these dietary laws because they're kinder to animals, or keep these dietary laws because they're healthy for you, or even keep these dietary laws because they'll make you different from the world around you and people around you. But I think all three of those are completely valid explanations for why we have these dietary rules. I think, in their time, they were considered absolutely the most humane way of consuming meat. I think in their time, they absolutely were deemed kind of healthy with digestion and kind of in hot climates and being careful about the food we eat that's, pre-refrigeration. And also absolutely that sense of having the same dietary laws as somebody else restricts who you sit with, and therefore gives you kind of preserves the boundaries of community and keeps a sense of identity outside of those boundaries. So I don't
Can
think
you tell
there
us
is
what
one.
they are as well for us audience?
Sure. So, they get very intricate, but the kind of headlines are that we don't consume milk and meat at the same time in the same meal. So no meat and dairy in the same meal. That there's certain animals that we don't consume. They have to chew the cud and have cloven hooves. So we do eat cows, for instance, but we don't eat pigs. And rules within which fish we're allowed to eat, so that they have to have a backbone and scales, which means we don't eat shellfish, prawns and crabs, lobsters, that kind of thing, but we do eat kind of whitefish, cod, haddock, that sort of thing. And those kind of big headline rules that come from Torah are then, through commentaries and through the ages, have become more and more and more fleshed out, as it were, as exactly how you keep them. So some people may choose to only have food that has certain foods that have an actual symbol, a hechsher on the packaging, to show that they are kosher foods. Other people will avoid the foods that I've listed, that sort of thing.
I also want to ask you to explain to me the sense of responsibility that the Torah talks about, which is not just towards yourself, but towards the world in general. And the concept of tikkun olam, which about repairing the world. Now, I want to ask you to explain that to me, one, in terms of the environment, but also in terms of what's happening in Israel at the moment, the strife between Israel and Palestine.
That is an interesting question. Tikkun olam in terms of the environment is an easier route to go down.
Yes.
So, from the moment that we're told about the kind of the creation of the world in in the biblical narrative, we're given a role as humans within that to kind of be stewards, to tread lightly, but to name each of the species and to be able to tend to their care, and that sense of building in rules in Torah to protect the environment is very much part of how we built that sense of knowing we had a responsibility to preserve the planet. So, even in war, for instance, there's rules around not cutting down fruit trees when you're, plundering a city, or when you plant a tree, how many years it is that you have to wait in order for the fruit to be ready for you to be allowed to eat it. You can't just, as soon as you've grown it, kind of pick it and eat it. I guess there's even that sense. So there's a concept called Shemitah that is every 7 years, we were told we had to let the land lie fallow and not use it for agricultural purposes. Now, actually, even in modern farming techniques, they'll tell you that's a great concept, sort of crop rotation, not constantly taking the nutrients out of the soil. That's baked into Torah rules to be able to say, don't farm that field every 7 years. There feels like a deep understanding of nature and of kind of the world around us. That Shemitah year gets replicated into something. So every 7 Shemitah years, every 50th year is seen as the Jubilee year, where actually we're told everything resets, so that everything you own kind of goes back to not being owned anymore. Now, actually, kind of Jewish scholarship will tell you that we don't think that was ever implemented. There was never a society that managed to implement the concept of the Jubilee year, but it does give us that important reminder of kind of ownership and who owns what, if anything, and reminds us that we might spend our lives accumulating stuff, but actually, who does it or what does it actually belong to?
And yeah. And again, there's this constant reminder that our time here is finite, which is, so important, I think, for us all to know and be aware of. How would Tikkun Olam and repairing the world work I know this is a very sensitive question. How would it work in terms of what's happening in Israel today?
There are two kind of conflicting Jewish concepts that Judaism is a religion that strives for peace. And within our daily prayer, 3 times a day within daily prayers, there's multiple references to that desire and that praying for peace. And yet, as I just referred to with the fruit trees, there's also a concept within Judaism that does acknowledge that sometimes there is need for war. And so, for me, there's a real sense that on the one hand, I would never want to see any lives lost. The devastation caused in Gaza is not just kind of horrific, but I find it deeply shameful. And I hate the idea that as a Jew and as a Zionist, that in any way, the lives lost of the Gazans and their infrastructure and their homes was in any way done in my name. And yet, for the first time in my lifetime, I saw on October the 7th the real possibility that Israel could get wiped off the map, that this element of my Jewish identity, which is baked into my Judaism, that's at the core of my Judaism and has been long before 1948, but has always been kind of part of that piece of land, that I saw its vulnerability. Which for older Jews who lived through, the Holocaust and the War of Independence and the Yom Kippur War and the multiple wars that Israel have had to fight to preserve its independence, this was a new feeling to me. And so Tikkun Olam absolutely might be the way that we frame the words, that is, how do we repair our world, and how do we sit alongside our neighbors and live in peace with our neighbors. But it's a deeply fragile time, which I also think Tikkun Olam recognizes, which is that we live in a broken world and that it's our job to repair it, that there's no sense that the world is perfect and that, we cause it to break, but rather that the world is broken and that each of us has to do our bit in order to repair it.
Working with different generations to try to make the Torah and the Jewish practices relevant today. So can you talk to me a little bit about that and how you work with young children to make it relevant to their lives?
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is it's an issue that's clearly present within all religions. I recently came back from a holiday in Thailand where we were taken to one very particularly beautiful newly built temple, where our guide was explaining that the local people had been very worried that their young adults were no longer kind of having that sense of responsibility to go to temple. And so they built it with the focus on kind of Instagram and social media and its beauty for photography, so that people would want to be there and to check in and to and kind of seen to be there posing for their photos. So religions all across the planet are looking for ways of keeping these kinds of ancient practices alive in the modern day. And I think, you were just talking about the war in Israel and Gaza, and one of the devastating kind of facts that has shown itself within Judaism over the generations is that actually often when Jews perceive themselves to be attacked and when there's a rise in anti-Semitism, there's also a rise in affiliation and people's kind of sense of themselves. So on the Shabbat after October the 7th, for instance, a lot of our young adults who, perhaps hadn't been in synagogue since they were teenagers were there and back and wanting to kind of affiliate. And so it's one of the real kind of, difficulties of kind of knowing that actually when people feel their sense of identity under attack, that's also when they kind of care about it most, or it means most to them. We're very much create communities that welcome in non-Jewish partners when Jews choose to marry people who were not themselves brought up as Jewish. And we have in our community lots of mixed faith families, and enable community to be gifted to them in a different way, rather than that kind of perception of old that that even terms like marrying out, where people are kind of lost to the faith, but rather what we see is the kind of the bringing in of other people to Jewish life as well. That synagogue should not be a place where kids associate coming to get bored. The things that are going to respond to kids, making sure that actually the food and the joy of their identity, the things that bring them a sense of belonging, their friendships. We even have Tevye the Torosaurus that comes to our under fives Shabbat service every week, a big blue dinosaur, just ways of being able to say, how can we ensure that our children have positive associations with this, that Judaism is not all about rules that prevent them doing things, but rather about being made to feel part of something that they want to be part of.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can you leave us with one practice which people who want to follow Judaism can look into, something from the Torah, something that people can do every day, something that's easy for people to do.
Yes. And I'm struggling to come with one, because I think there's definitely, at least, two at my minimum. In one way, we could go the Rabbi Hillel route, which is one Jewish practice, which would not just change you, but change the world. If we all, didn't do to other people what we wouldn't want done to ourselves, or to kind of love our neighbors as ourselves, that would be one practice. But I suspect you're looking for something a bit more tangible. And again, whether it's weekly or daily. So I think, as you've said, Shabbat was the ultimate detox. What does it mean to take 25 hours out of one's life each week and say, I'm going to put some boundaries around this. I'm going to take out the screens and the work and the errands, and I'm going to fill it with food and family and friends and fun, and see what a difference that makes to the other 6 days of the week. But also there's a lovely practice in Judaism. So before we do all sorts of things, whether it's going to the toilet or eating food or waking up in the morning, each thing we do is accompanied by a blessing. And Judaism says that we should each strive to find 100 blessings in our day. We should each say 100 blessings. But even if you don't have the wording for the perfect blessing, there's something about noticing what's worthy of blessing in your life. And I mentioned the blessing before going to the toilet in the morning, just because there's something about, we're all so conscious when our bodies don't do what we want them to do, when they're not working. But how many of us kind of thank and bless our bodies when it's just doing normal things, when it's working? And so if you nail down your 100 blessings to every little thing, seeing the smile of someone you love greeting you, and being able to enjoy the sunshine in the middle of a gloomy week. I think there's something about, we view ourselves and the world differently if we're able to find our 100 blessings in a day.
That's lovely. That's absolutely lovely. The 100 blessings, that's what I'm going to go back with, because I feel like gratitude changed my life. And this is, like you said, this is just a form of gratitude. And when you're blessing something, you're also blessing that other thing, you're including it. I think it's above gratitude. It's gratitude plus more. So thank you for that. Thank you for this hugely insightful conversation, for talking to us about your rituals, about justice, compassion, humility, all the wonderful things. Thank you for being here with us today.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
To our listeners, we've had this incredible conversation today. I'm going back thinking that in times of flux, in times now where there's so much strife, wisdom, going back to ancient wisdom, is such an incredible guide. I'm going to leave you with a reflection from the Torah, which reads, "She, the Torah, is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called blessed." Thank you for joining us for Ancient Wisdom for Modern Living, Sacred Text, Timeless Wisdom. Until next time, may wisdom light your path.